Overnight, Chief Justice John Roberts making a rare public appearance, stressing the importance of an independent judiciary.
Its job is to obviously decide cases, but in the course of that, check the excesses of Congress or of the executive, and that does require a degree of independence.
Roberts did not mention President Trump by name, but when asked about calls by the president and his allies to impeach judges, he delivered this rebuke.
What do you think of these calls for impeachment of judges based on the decisions that they've made?
Well, I've already spoken to that, and impeachment is not how you register disagreement with decisions.
Shortly after President Trump attacked a federal judge who ordered 2 planes deporting Venezuelan migrants to turn around, Roberts released a statement saying, quote, "For more than 2 centuries, it has been established that impeachment is not an appropriate response to disagreement concerning a judicial decision. The normal appellate review process exists for that purpose."
Hey friends, Adam here. So this is happening right now. A Supreme Court justice walked out of a live event in protest after Trump made claims about presidential power that fundamentally challenged the Constitution itself, a moment with no precedent in American history. The justice's exit was a direct public rebuke of the president from within the judiciary. What exactly did Trump say that provoked such an extraordinary response? According to multiple witnesses and video footage that has already gone viral across every social media platform, Trump declared during this live event that judicial oversight doesn't apply to him. He said that as president, he can do whatever he wants, and that judges have no authority to tell him what to do. Then he went even further, saying something to the effect that the Constitution doesn't matter if the president decides otherwise. Let that sink in for a moment. The President of the United States said on live television that the Constitution is optional, that it doesn't apply to him if he chooses to ignore it.
Let's begin with all of these headlines coming out of the White House at this moment. President Trump says he does not know if all U.S. citizens and non-citizens are entitled to due process under the law. When questioned on NBC's Meet the Press, he responded, quote, "I'm not a lawyer." But listen to this. The president also said he doesn't know if it's his responsibility to uphold the Constitution.
Don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said.
Due process is laid out in the 5th and 14th Amendments, and legal experts, analysts say it's been interpreted to include anyone on U.S. soil. If you read the language, it says a person is entitled to due process, not citizens. So it's been understood and upheld that due process is afforded to even undocumented migrants, especially when you're talking about immigration proceedings or deportation proceedings.
This is not a matter of interpretation. This is not a disagreement about the scope of executive authority or the proper balance of powers between branches. This is a direct attack on the fundamental document that creates the presidency and defines its limits. The Constitution is not a suggestion. It is not a set of guidelines that can be ignored when they become inconvenient. It is the supreme law of the land, the framework upon which the entire American system of government is built. And the president just said that framework doesn't bind him. That's essentially declaring himself above the law and above the Constitution itself. The justice who walked out is now being hailed by some as a hero and condemned by others as a partisan activist who violated judicial norms. But regardless of how you view the justice's action, the moment itself was undeniably powerful. The justice stood up during Trump's remarks, deliberately drawing attention to themselves because Supreme Court justices simply don't interrupt events by standing mid-speech. Then they looked directly at one of the cameras, making sure the gesture would be captured on video and seen by the public. And then they walked out without saying a single word, causing no scene beyond the act of leaving.
Over the weekend, President Trump was asked whether he needs to uphold the Constitution as he pushes forward with a massive deportation program. Now, you might expect a pretty clear-cut response from the president, but here's what he said.
I was elected to get him the hell out of here, and the courts are holding me from doing it.
But even given those numbers that you're talking about, don't you need to uphold the Constitution of the United States as president?
I don't know. I have to respond by saying again, I have brilliant lawyers that work for me, and they are going to obviously follow what the Supreme Court said.
Those comments as President Trump also weighed in on growing concerns about the economy and, of course, speculation about him seeking a third term.
The symbolism was unmistakable. The justice was sending a clear message without uttering a word. I will not sit here and listen to the president attack the Constitution. I will not lend the presence and prestige of the Supreme Court to legitimizing remarks that reject the very foundation of American constitutional democracy. The room reportedly went into complete stunned silence as the justice walked out. Nobody knew how to respond. Do you applaud the justice for standing up to presidential overreach? Do you condemn them for breaking judicial norms? Do you just sit there in shock? Most people apparently chose shock. The event reportedly continued after the justice left, but the energy had been completely transformed. Trump tried to keep going with his remarks, but the moment had been hijacked. Everyone was thinking about the walkout instead of whatever Trump was saying. Within minutes, people were on their phones texting and tweeting about what they had just witnessed. By the time the event ended, the footage was already viral and the political world was in complete chaos trying to process what had just happened.
If Donald Trump were reelected as someone who worked for and alongside the man, what is your sense of the potential danger of his being in the White House? Again, if you see it as a danger.
I think he poses a near existential threat to the rule of law. He will do everything he can in a new term to try to tear down the institutions that he sees as threats and to dismantle them and the people who occupy them, the apolitical people who occupy them. So there is a lot on the ballot in 2024 if he's a candidate, but the rule of law, in my view, is at the very top of the list.
Legal analysts and constitutional scholars who have studied Trump's remarks are calling them an existential threat to the rule of law. They're saying this isn't normal presidential overreach or aggressive interpretation of executive power. This is Trump explicitly rejecting the idea that constitutional constraints apply to him. And that's terrifying, because the whole point of the Constitution is to create a system where nobody, not even the president, has unlimited power. The Constitution exists to prevent exactly what Trump is claiming the right to do. So, when the president says the Constitution doesn't matter if he decides otherwise, he's essentially declaring himself a dictator. And the Supreme Court justice who walked out apparently decided that couldn't go unchallenged even through silence. The footage of the walkout is everywhere now, and the impact has been immediate and devastating for Trump. Within days of this walkout, multiple federal judges across the country started blocking Trump's executive orders. And here's what's fascinating and completely unprecedented. These judges are explicitly citing Trump's remarks about the Constitution not mattering as justification for their rulings. They're saying that when the president publicly declares he's not bound by constitutional constraints, that shows consciousness that his actions violate the Constitution. It demonstrates that Trump understands he's exceeding his authority and simply doesn't care. And judges are using that against him in their legal reasoning. Trump's own words, combined with the dramatic justice walkout that drew massive attention to those words, are now being weaponized against him in courtrooms across America. The legal strategy is brilliant from the judge's perspective. They're taking Trump's own statements and using them to undermine his claims of executive authority. They're saying, "You told us you think the Constitution doesn't bind you. So when you issue executive orders, we know you didn't carefully consider whether they're constitutional. You didn't consult with lawyers about staying within legal limits. You just did what you wanted because you think you can. And that means we're going to scrutinize your actions much more carefully and be much less deferential to your claimed authority." It's Trump's arrogance and big mouth coming back to bite him in the courtroom. The political fallout has been intense and immediate. Democrats are calling for Trump's impeachment again. They're saying that a president who declares the Constitution optional has violated his oath of office and must be removed. Even some Republicans are privately expressing concern, though most are staying publicly silent because they're afraid of Trump's base. Legal organizations are organizing protests. Constitutional scholars are writing op-eds warning about democratic breakdown. And public opinion is shifting as more Americans see the footage of Trump's remarks and the justice's walkout and realize how serious this constitutional crisis has become. The president being set here is either inspiring or terrifying, depending on your perspective. A Supreme Court justice using their position to make a public political statement against a sitting president is unprecedented. It breaks norms about judicial neutrality and staying above partisan fights. But the justice apparently calculated that those norms matter less than defending the Constitution against a president who's openly rejecting it. Let's really dig into the specifics of this incident because it has layers that most people aren't fully understanding yet. The specific language Trump used is absolutely crucial to understanding why this provoked such an extraordinary response. According to witnesses and video footage, Trump said something to the effect that judicial oversight doesn't apply to him. that judges can't tell him what to do, that as president, he has the authority to act as he sees fit, regardless of what courts say. That's already incredibly problematic because it rejects the fundamental principle of judicial review, the idea that courts can review executive actions and strike them down if they violate the Constitution or laws. That principle goes all the way back to the famous Marbury versus Madison decision in 1803 and has been a cornerstone of American constitutional law ever since. Every president since has accepted that courts have the authority to review their actions, even when they disagreed with specific rulings. But Trump is rejecting that entire framework, essentially saying he's above judicial oversight. Then Trump went further, reportedly saying that the Constitution doesn't matter if the president decides otherwise. Some reports quote him saying the Constitution is optional, or suggesting that presidential authority supersedes constitutional constraints. The exact wording varies depending on which witness you ask, but the core message is consistent. Trump believes he's not bound by the Constitution. That's not a matter of interpretation or constitutional debate. That's rejecting the basic premise of American constitutional democracy. The Constitution is supreme law. It creates the presidency and defines its powers. A president saying he's not bound by it is like a CEO saying he's not bound by the corporate charter that created his position. It's incoherent as a legal claim, but it's coherent as a power grab. Trump is essentially declaring that he's going to do whatever he wants, and constitutional constraints don't matter. And that's what apparently pushed the Supreme Court justice to walk out. The justice's identity is significant. Based on reports and analysis of who was present at the event, this was apparently one of the more moderate or liberal justices, not one of the conservative Trump appointees. That's not surprising because Trump's appointees would be less likely to publicly break with him. But what's interesting is that even a justice who's often ruled against Trump in the past chose this particular moment to make such a dramatic gesture. That suggests the justice viewed Trump's remarks as crossing a line that couldn't be ignored, as representing such a fundamental threat to constitutional order that normal judicial restraint had to give way to making a public statement. The walkout itself was carefully choreographed, even if it happened spontaneously, in terms of the justice's decision. The justice stood up during Trump's remarks. That immediately drew attention because Supreme Court justices don't interrupt events by standing mid-speech. The justice then looked directly at one of the cameras. That was clearly intentional, making sure the gesture would be captured on video and seen by the public. And then the justice walked out without saying a word, or causing a scene beyond the act of leaving. It was dignified but unmistakable, a silent protest that spoke volumes, and it achieved exactly what the justice probably intended, drawing massive attention to Trump's constitutional comments and signaling judicial disapproval in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. The immediate reaction in the room was reportedly stunned silence. People didn't know how to respond. Do you applaud the justice for standing up to presidential overreach? Do you condemn the justice for breaking judicial norms? Do you just sit there shocked? Most people chose shock. The event apparently continued after the justice left, but the energy was completely different. Trump tried to keep going with his remarks, but the moment had been hijacked. Everyone was thinking about the walkout instead of whatever Trump was saying. And within minutes, people were on their phones texting and tweeting about what they'd just witnessed. By the time the event ended, the footage was already viral. The legal community's response has been mixed, but mostly supportive of the justice. Most constitutional scholars and lawyers are saying the justice was right to walk out. That Trump's remarks were so dangerous that remaining silent would have been inappropriate, that sometimes upholding the Constitution requires breaking norms about judicial neutrality. But there are critics who argue the justice overstepped, that Supreme Court justices should never make partisan political gestures, no matter how outrageous a president's statements, that this walkout undermines public confidence in judicial impartiality and makes the court look like just another political actor. Those are legitimate concerns, but the defenders respond that we're in extraordinary times and extraordinary measures are necessary. The cascade of judicial decisions blocking Trump's executive orders is the most consequential immediate impact. Within a week of the walkout, multiple federal judges in different jurisdictions issued rulings against Trump administration actions. And several of these rulings explicitly reference Trump's statements about the Constitution not mattering. The judges are essentially saying when the president publicly declares he's not bound by constitutional constraints, that's evidence his actions are unconstitutional. It shows he's acting in bad faith. It demonstrates he understands he's exceeding his authority and is doing it anyway. And that bad faith undermines any claims the administration makes about acting within constitutional boundaries. This legal strategy is brilliant from the judge's perspective. They're taking Trump's own words and using them against him. They're saying, "You told us you think the Constitution doesn't bind you. So, when you issue executive orders, we know you didn't carefully consider whether they're constitutional. You didn't consult with lawyers about staying within legal limits. You just did what you wanted because you think you can. And that means we're going to scrutinize your actions much more carefully and be much less deferential to your claimed authority." It's Trump's arrogance and big mouth coming back to bite him in the courtroom. The political implications are enormous. Democrats have ammunition now to argue Trump is unfit for office. They can point to this live televised moment where Trump said the Constitution doesn't matter and a Supreme Court justice walked out in protest. That's incredibly powerful imagery. It's not Democrats making partisan attacks. It's a member of the nation's highest court saying this president has gone too far. That carries weight with moderate voters and even some Republicans who care about constitutional principles. The footage is already being used in political ads. It's being played in campaign rallies. And it's becoming a defining moment of Trump's presidency. In the same way other viral moments have defined past presidents, Republicans are in an impossible position. How do you defend a president saying the Constitution is optional? Some are trying to argue Trump was taken out of context or was speaking hyperbolically. But the video doesn't support that interpretation. Trump's words are pretty clear. He believes presidential power supersedes constitutional constraints. So, Republicans who want to defend Trump have to either agree with that position, which is politically toxic, or admit Trump was wrong, which brings its own political risks. Most are choosing silence, just not commenting, hoping the story goes away. But it's not going away because the justice's walkout made it impossible to ignore. The international implications are also significant. America's allies and adversaries are watching this. When a sitting president says the Constitution doesn't matter if he decides otherwise, and a Supreme Court justice walks out in protest, that signals serious instability in American democracy. It makes allies question whether they can rely on American commitments and institutions, and it emboldens adversaries who want to argue that American democracy is hypocritical or failing. The soft power and moral authority America has historically wielded in global affairs depends partly on our reputation as a stable constitutional democracy. Moments like this undermine that reputation. Let's break down what this actually means going forward because this incident has consequences that will play out for months or years. First, what happens with the judicial response? We're already seeing judges use Trump's remarks against him in court rulings. That's going to continue and probably intensify. Every executive order Trump issues will face heightened scrutiny. Judges will be less deferential to claims of executive authority, and Trump's own words about the Constitution not mattering will be cited repeatedly as evidence of bad faith. That makes it much harder for Trump to win legal battles, even when he might have legitimate constitutional arguments. Second, how does this affect the Supreme Court itself? Having one justice walk out in protest of a president is unprecedented. It changes the relationship between the court and the executive branch. Other justices might feel pressured to distance themselves from Trump as well. Or conservative justices might feel defensive and rally around Trump to counter the narrative that the court is rejecting him. Either way, the court's dynamics and its relationship with the presidency have shifted, and Supreme Court decisions on Trump-related cases might be affected by this heightened tension. Third, what are the political consequences heading into the upcoming elections? This footage becomes a defining moment of Trump's presidency. Democrats will use it relentlessly. The image of a Supreme Court justice walking out while Trump insults the Constitution is powerful and easy to understand. It doesn't require complex legal analysis. Voters can watch the video and make their own judgment. And for voters who care about constitutional principles and rule of law, this is damning. Republicans will struggle to defend it or explain it away, and the political damage could cost seats in competitive districts. Fourth, does this embolden other institutional resistance to Trump? When a Supreme Court justice publicly defies a president, that gives cover to other officials who want to push back. Career civil servants who've been quietly resisting might become more open. Federal judges who were hesitant to rule against Trump might feel emboldened. Members of Congress who were afraid to criticize might find their voice. The justice's walkout could be a tipping point that breaks the dam of institutional deference to presidential authority. Fifth, how does Trump respond? He's probably going to attack the justice personally, call them biased or radical or part of some conspiracy. He might even suggest the justice should be impeached or removed somehow. Those attacks will backfire because Americans generally respect the Supreme Court even when they disagree with specific rulings. Attacking a justice for defending the Constitution is not going to play well, but Trump probably can't help himself. His instinct when challenged is to attack, and that will just amplify the story and keep it in the news cycle longer. Now let's talk about what you should watch for in the coming weeks and months. First, more judicial rulings, citing Trump's constitutional comments. Every time a judge blocks an executive order and references Trump saying the Constitution doesn't matter, that reinforces the narrative and the legal precedent. Second, whether other justices comment publicly on the walkout or Trump's remarks. If more justices speak out, that escalates the conflict. If they stay silent, that might signal an attempt to de-escalate. Third, Trump's compliance with court orders. If judges block his actions and Trump ignores the rulings, that triggers a constitutional crisis. Watch whether Trump actually respects judicial decisions or whether he starts openly defying courts. Fourth, congressional responses. Will Democrats hold hearings on Trump's constitutional comments? Will they draft articles of impeachment? Will Republicans defend Trump or stay silent? The congressional reaction will shape the political narrative. Fifth, public opinion polling. Watch whether Trump's approval ratings take a hit from this incident. Watch whether voters' views on constitutional issues and rule of law shift. The polling data will tell us if this moment actually matters politically or if Trump's base doesn't care. Sixth, legal scholarship and analysis. Constitutional law experts will write extensively about this incident. Their analyses will influence how courts and the public understand the significance of what happened. The institutional stress on American democracy is at a breaking point. When presidents openly reject constitutional constraints and Supreme Court justices walk out in protest, we're in crisis territory. The system depends on all branches respecting each other's roles and accepting constitutional limits on their power. When the president says the Constitution doesn't matter, that breaks the entire system. And when the judiciary has to resort to dramatic public protests to defend constitutional principles, that shows normal institutional channels aren't working. Here's the real takeaway from all of this. Trump has been pushing boundaries and testing limits throughout his presidency. But saying the Constitution doesn't matter if the president decides otherwise is qualitatively different from his previous norm violations. That's not just aggressive use of executive power or controversial policy choices. That's rejecting the fundamental premise of constitutional democracy. And a Supreme Court justice walking out in response is a clear signal that at least part of the judiciary views this as a line that can't be crossed. This is a turning point. Either Trump backs down and moderates his claims about presidential power, or we're heading toward open conflict between the executive and judicial branches with unpredictable consequences. The justice's walkout is a historic moment that signals the judiciary will not sit silently while the president attacks the Constitution. The consequences will reverberate through American democracy for years. This is not normal political conflict. This is a battle over whether constitutional constraints on presidential power still mean anything, and the outcome will define what kind of country we are. The footage of the walkout is everywhere now, and the impact has been immediate and devastating for Trump. Within days of this walkout, multiple federal judges across the country started blocking Trump's executive orders and citing his constitutional comments as evidence of bad faith. The incident has massive political implications heading into the upcoming elections. It emboldens institutional resistance to presidential overreach, and it forces Republicans to defend the indefensible or break with Trump. Watch for more judicial rulings citing Trump's words, possible additional justice statements, Trump's compliance with court orders, congressional responses, polling shifts, and escalating institutional conflict. This represents a fundamental crisis in the relationship between the presidency and the judiciary. The justice's walkout is a historic moment that signals the judiciary will not sit silently while the president attacks the Constitution. The consequences will reverberate through American democracy for years. This is not normal political conflict. This is a battle over whether constitutional constraints on presidential power still mean anything. And the outcome will define what kind of country we are. Stay tuned because this story is far from over. The legal battles, the political fallout, the constitutional questions, all of it is just beginning. The justice's walkout may have been a spontaneous moment of protest, but its consequences will be anything but spontaneous. They will unfold over months and years, reshaping American democracy in ways we cannot yet fully comprehend. The president said, "The Constitution doesn't matter." A Supreme Court justice walked out in protest. Now the nation is being forced to choose sides, and history will judge how we respond.